next half an hour, we're going to be seeing what's making the headlines with the PR consultant Alex Dean and chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Sodha. So hello to both of you. So let's take a look then at what's on those front pages. And the Eye leads with the terror scare at Westminster, a man arrested near the Houses of Parliament carrying a number of knives. The Metro also has the Whitehall arrest, saying terror returned to Parliament just yards from where an officer was stabbed to death last month. The Daily Telegraph also carries the story, saying the 27-year-old lone wolf, as they put it, had been under close surveillance when counter-terrorism officers ordered his immediate detention as he came within 300 metres of the Prime Minister's residence. The Guardian claims the police swooped on the man after being tipped off by a member of Britain's Muslim community who was concerned about the man's behaviour. The Daily Express reports at least 10 officers forced the man to the ground during the arrest, while The Sun reports a witness as saying the suspect was very calm. The Financial Times reports that European leaders are preparing to recognise the potential for a united Ireland within the EU, which would see Northern Ireland rejoin the bloc after Brexit in the event of a vote for Irish reunification. The Daily Mail has spoken to the wife of Sergeant Alexander Blackman about her joy over her husband's imminent release. The Times covers the order from a High Court judge that the government publish its strategy for improving air quality, which the Environment Secretary had applied for to be delayed until after the election. So let's talk through those stories with Alex Dean and Sonia Sodha, or at least a lot of them. And in fact, one big story dominates a lot of the front pages. You've actually picked out The Guardian's take on this, and this was the arrest today, the dramatic arrest at Westminster, which is reflected there exactly in their headline.
Yes, we don't know what his intention was, but plainly from the facts set out here, if accurate, not good. A man arrested with, it is said, a bag full of knives. Police seem to have monitored him from wherever he was coming from, presumably his home, through the public underground and the public transport network at St James's Park Station, walking to Westminster, where he was apprehended. He seems, from the photographs that are on the front of many newspapers, not only completely calm, but very pleased with himself. And he has, we were talking before, he has landed himself a great deal of publicity today. And as his motives, whatever twisted motives they are, emerge, he will have gathered publicity for them too.
And as you say, we don't know those motives at all yet, very early in the investigation, and he has been arrested, as we say. But the location of this arrest, so close to the Houses of Parliament, so close to Downing Street, will cause concern, not just for police and security services, but also for MPs and people who work in that area.
Absolutely, for everyone who I think would have been in that area this afternoon. And as you say, it comes just weeks after the terrible terror attack we saw in Westminster, yes, just 4 weeks ago. And I think it does come at a worrying time. We've got a general election campaign on. We saw a terror attack in France in the run-up to their first round of their presidential contest. The police have issued new security guidance for MPs about keeping safe. Lots of MPs have said, though, it's business as usual. You know, we're not going to change the way we do things, and all credit to them, I think for that. But yes, it's very worrying. But isn't it a relief to be talking about a terror attack that has been thwarted rather than one that's been successful?
Well, that's right, and certainly no attack happened. And let's move on to the front of the Times there. It's actually the story across the banner head there, across the top, that you want to talk about. Yeah. Judge tells government it must publish air pollution plan. And this is a plan that's been in the offing for a while, hasn't it?
Yes, well, the government has really... So there were these legal targets around air pollution that the government had to meet in 2010. Didn't do anything about them, didn't meet them, didn't publish any sort of plan. In the end, an environmental group took the government to court, and the Supreme Court ruled that the government had to produce a plan. It did in the end, but it was so rubbish that, again, the government got taken to court, and the court said, this plan just isn't good enough. Now, this is the latest round in this wrangle. So the government was supposed to, the court imposed a deadline, said that the government had to produce a new air quality plan by Monday of this week. And the government has again tried to delay proceedings. It says, well, we're in the run-up to the election. The convention is you don't put out new announcements. But there's actually very clear guidance in the Cabinet Office's own pre-election conventions that says when it's a matter of public health, you can go ahead. And this really is a matter of public health. Air quality, poor air quality causes 40,000 premature deaths a year.
I thought
so
it was an
really
emergency
important.
rather than, I mean...
the guidance isn't clear. The government tried to argue it has to be an emergency, but the judge was very clear.
Okay. Sorry, Sonia, but if it was just public health, I'm not disagreeing with you necessarily, and of course no one's in favour of pollution, but if it were just public health issues that meant PERDA didn't apply, then the Department of Health would publish all, it would continue throughout, but its business would not be interrupted by PERDA. So all the other departments would keep going. But if you were a health-related minister, you would keep doing policies because it was public health-related. So that can't be right. So there has to be a bigger sense of urgency. I'm not saying you're wrong necessarily, but it can't just be public health, can it?
But the suggestion must be, must it not, that this report is not going to be terribly complimentary towards the government's handling of the issue of pollution, and that could be damaging to the government?
Well, I think what's in play here is that the government doesn't want to publish its plan because it's very, very likely to include measures against diesel cars and drivers of diesel cars.
You think it's going to be electorally unpopular?
Yes, and so it's trying to avoid putting out anything with suggestions of that. And that is the government putting its own political interests before the health of children.
You're assuming a negative motive and then condemning the motive that you've set up yourself.
I think it's pretty obvious what the motive was, actually. When you look at what the judge said...
that's what you want to see.
No, when you look at what the judge said, the judge asked a question in his ruling where he said that there's no difference between the government putting this out now and the political parties having debate about whether the plan's the right one, or political parties debating what ought to be
if that's the game that you want, if you want to get into that sort of ping-pong, the fact that so many people are driving...
It's not me, it's a judge.
All right, the fact that so many people are driving diesel vehicles is due to the fact that the Labour government we had last encouraged people to buy diesels. So that's what we've got to get over. If a plan involves trying to deal with that and should be published sooner, then sure, perhaps the plan should be published. But honestly, to suggest that there is some kind of political motive behind it and then go hell for leather to attacking the motive that you've yourself ascribed to it is thin gruel to me.
Well, I think it's pretty clear what the motive is. Otherwise, why would the government not publish it?
Because we're in
Why
PERDA.
does it work so
There is
hard?
a genuine reason.
No, but the judge threw that out, Alex, and very, very convincingly as well.
OK, I'm just going to interrupt you two because we are going to talk now to our Home Affairs correspondent, Mark White, who has some breaking news to bring us. Mark White, what can you tell us?
Yes, information coming through to us that police have shot a woman during an anti-terror operation this evening in northwest London. Now, this was a pre-planned, coordinated raid on an address in Harlesden Road in northwest London just shortly after 7 o'clock in the evening. At the address, as police entered, and it was armed police that were in attendance there, a woman, we're told she's in her 20s, was shot by armed police. She has been taken to hospital at the moment. We're told she's not been arrested because of her medical condition. Clearly, she's being treated for gunshot injuries. We don't know just how seriously injured she is at this stage. We can tell you that 4 other people have now been arrested at that address. The first, a 20-year-old man arrested near the address. A male who is age 16 and a woman age 20 were arrested at the address, and a 43-year-old woman arrested in Kent a short while later. Now, the 4 that have been arrested on suspicion of commission, preparation and instigation of a terrorist act under the terrorism legislation. The address is currently being searched by counter-terrorism police officers. The ongoing operation, we're told, is not linked to the arrest of that man in Whitehall in central London earlier today, a man with a rucksack full of knives who was stopped again in another anti-terrorist related operation. This is a quite separate counter-terrorism investigation in northwest London and Harlesden Road. Police entered that property, armed officers then shot a woman in her 20s. She is now being treated in hospital. The operation is still ongoing at this hour.
OK, Mark, well, I know you'll keep us up to date with all the latest developments on that breaking news. Our Home Affairs editor there telling us that police have shot a woman during an anti-terror operation in northwest London, and a number of other arrests have also taken place. So more details on that as and when we get them. In the meantime, though, let's return to our paper review and let's bring in one of the other stories that you wanted to talk about next. Move on to the issue of Angela Merkel making a few comments today that were picked up by the Prime Minister. The headline there inside The Sun is PM's game of Merk-believe.
Yes, Angela Merkel is suggested in the Bundestag that there are some in Britain that think they're going to have an easy ride when it comes to the Brexit negotiations, and she wanted to disillusion anyone who felt like that out of their views, because in her words it would be a waste of time to have that perspective. We've discussed it already, and I know we disagree, but it seems to me these comments are made in full, of course, cognizance that we have an election underway in the UK. Most political leaders are savvy enough to know that what they say in one jurisdiction is going to land in another. And I think it's normally quite counterproductive to seek to intervene in another person's politics. I mean, Guy Verhofstadt only recently said that our calling of the election was a terrible idea, or words to that effect.
She does have her own election as well, doesn't she? It could be that she's talking to her own electorate rather than having a dig at ours.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that laying out what the EU negotiating position is her trying to interfere with the general election campaign over here. To me, this is a really non-news story, actually. I mean, this is something that Merkel's been saying for months. It's not something new. She's telling Britain that, unlike what Boris Johnson said, we can't have our cake and eat it. If we don't want to subscribe to freedom of movement, there are things we will need to sacrifice. And she's just disabusing I think she's really addressing British politicians rather than the British electorate, just saying, no, you can't have your cake and eat it. And the idea that Theresa May has sort of painted this as, the 27 member states of the EU sort of joining together in opposition to Britain, surely that's what we've got to expect, that they've got to come up with a common negotiating position. They're being transparent about what that is, and we should welcome their transparency.
Well, certainly Angela Merkel, rather, is putting the EU's position. And to some extent, has Theresa May come out quite well out of this? She's used this to say, this just shows we need someone tough at the top to carry out negotiations.
Well, bear in mind, we have formal negotiation teams, set on one side and set on the other. Angela Merkel isn't one of them. And when you say
because Theresa May hasn't said anything, has she?
Gosh, I'll tell you what, I'll make a point and then you make one. The Irish, the Dutch and the Danes said they didn't want people to get tied up in arguments that were trivial or were party political, and wanted instead to get to the substance of things, because it was in mutual interest on both sides to deliver a positive exit of the UK. That's the sort of thing I think is helpful. This, on the other hand, election or no in Germany, I think is not.
OK, we've got lots to talk about with schools, but I think we might take a break because have a bit of time to breathe and then think about that in just a moment. And something else we'll be talking about as well. Are you a mugwump or an Islingtonian?